Hello, and a warm welcome to each and every one of you. This way? A warm welcome to each and every one of you. Most of you already know Anantuji, who will be conducting the program today. But for those who are meeting him for the first time, I think a brief introduction is in order. Anantuji has a degree in engineering from IIT Madras and a master's from Stanford University in management engineering, management science and engineering. His late wife, Jyoti ji, who I remember ever so fondly, was the head of the sociology department in St. Xavier's, Mumbai, and she also taught in IIT Delhi. Back in 1977, they both decided to leave their careers and dedicate their lives to Seva. They were associated with the Gandhi Peace Foundation for 14 years. In 1991, they co-founded Navadarshanam, which is a public charitable trust dedicated for ecological and spiritual regeneration in a poverty-stricken rural area not far from Bangalore. In 2012, after Jyoti ji and his mother passed away, Anantuji shifted to his guru's ashram in Beas, Punjab. He still continued to be passionate about his research in the space of the confluence between science and spirituality. Today's program is a result of this research. It will be predominantly in the form of a slideshow, and it will also be interspersed with songs from the Kabir tradition. Those songs which highlight the points corroborated in the presentation. The Kabir bhajans will be sung by Shanti Subbaraman and her son, Nishant Panikar. They will be accompanied on the tabla by her husband, Dilip Panikar. All three of them have a base in science and technology, but they're also equally devoted to music and spirituality, just like their mentor, Tara Kini, who unfortunately couldn't join us today because she's recovering from a surgery. So today's program will be about 2.5 hours long, and we will have a slot of about 20 to 30 minutes for question and answers after that. We'll also have a break for about 5 to 10 minutes in between so that you could stretch your legs and use the restroom. We'll be serving lunch after the program, and we'd really like all of you to join us. So first, if I could request each and every one of you to please switch off your mobile phones. May I request you to take one moment to do this. Like I mentioned, there is a 20 to 30 minute slot for question and answers. So if you have any comments or questions, please reserve them till the end, and please come forward because we are recording the event. And should anybody want a copy of this recording, you could leave your email IDs with us. You could also get in touch with me, and my details are available in the announcement brochure. Once again, requesting everyone to please switch off your mobile phones. Thank you. Over to you, Anantuji.
Thank you, Priya. And thank you not just for this introduction, but for the amazing perseverance with which you and your husband have overcome the many obstacles that were threatening to derail this program over the last 2 months, and the meticulousness with which you have planned out every single detail of this program, and last but not least, the generosity with which you have taken care of all the expenses, this hall, this video system, the chairs, the lunch, everything, and refuse to accept contributions from anyone to defray the expenses. I'm really overwhelmed by your selflessness and your hospitality. So thank you very much, Priya. And thank you, Shanvas. And of course, I need to thank each one of you. I'm amazed that so many of you have come here on a Sunday morning, getting up early so that you can be here on time. And so now it is my responsibility to make sure that you will consider that sacrifice of a Sunday morning worth it. And in this, I am sorely missing a support that I have always had on such an occasion, that of Tara Kinney. But I am happy that this program is happening in the home of her brother, Ramchandra Pai, who incidentally was my classmate and hostel mate for 5 years. He is 10 years older to Tara. And so my association with Tara's family dates back to when she was just 6 years old. And it's been most interesting to see the two siblings both pursue the ideal of truth, but from different directions. Her brother, those of you who know him would know that he is the ideal scientist engineer. Even when he was a student, he was busy all the time designing telescopes. Later in life, he designed aeroplanes. And even now at the age of 80, he's there upstairs designing drones and helicopters and so on. Whereas Tara has pursued truth, not the outer way, but the inner way. Through Kabir, through Drupad, through the Upanishads, through Rumi. Today my aim would be to bring together these two ways of pursuing truth through the discipline called mathematics. Because after all, where does her brother find all that information needed to make his designs? It's in his forehead, especially the mathematics resident in his forehead. It's truly amazing how well mathematical models have been able to tell us facts about physical reality. For example, no one had even suspected that the planet that we now call Neptune had existed until a mathematical model pointed out its existence. These days there is a lot of hullabaloo about AI, but at the base of it is the fantastic ability of mathematical models to reproduce not just physical reality, but maybe even mental reality. So all this goes to show that in a way, science and mathematics is also confirming what mystics have always insisted over centuries: the fantastic potential of the human forehead. In the Guru Granth Sahib, it says, Sab kuch bhitar. That means everything that we see outside is actually inside of us. Where inside? Inside our own forehead, which they have compared to a cave holding unbelievable treasures, including the Lord himself. That's why in the South Indian tradition, Shiva is referred to as Guhan, someone who resides in the gufa, in the cave. Of course, all this sounds strange to us because it is invisible. Mysticism is the art and science of converting the invisible to the visible by withdrawing our consciousness from the outside and focusing it here inside the forehead. By doing that, our consciousness becomes aware of itself. That means we get to know the answer to the basic question, what exactly is consciousness. Today, we talk about consciousness, but we really don't know what it is. Once we go through that process, the answer about the mystery of consciousness becomes very clear. And along with it, two things also become very clear. One is that what we call God is nothing other than our own consciousness in its pure form. That's why the most common term used in our country for God is Ram. Jo sab mein Rama hua hai. The consciousness resident within each one of us. The second thing that becomes evident is that at that level of consciousness, we are all one. That's why it's called ADVAITA. What does that mean? For example, if someone were to ask, how many people are there in this room? We would give a number as an answer. Let's say 70. But that only means 70 bodies are present. We don't know whether 70 minds are present. Some minds might be roaming in so many other places. That's because the mind is invisible to us. Are you comfortable there? Yes. Would you like to go behind and sit now? You're okay? Okay. So, just like the mind is invisible to us, consciousness is even more invisible. But those who know, who can see consciousness, what we call the mystics like Kabir, they tell us that at the level of consciousness, if you count the number of room, there is just one person present. Just one. Sounds a strange answer, right? But it's not just mystics like Kabir who have told us that. Erwin Schrödinger of the famous Schrödinger's equation tells us that the plurality that we perceive is only an appearance. It is not real. There is no such word as consciousnesses. In today's presentation, I am going to make use of quotations from several eminent scientists and mathematicians, which I have taken from what I regard are impeccable sources. I have not put up the sources here on the slide to avoid cluttering them, but for anyone who is interested in knowing the sources, I have a separate document, the sources of these quotes, and any of you is welcome to it. What I have done today is made use of these quotes to weave today's theme around the notion of infinity. I am going to try to show that the origin of many terms that we use in science and mathematics, in everyday language, and in spirituality, terms like fields, arithmetic, music, flower, university, God, all these, their origin lies in infinity. And infinity is the same as Advaita. Let's start with the last of these terms, Purnam. Many of you would have been familiar with the Shanti mantra, which tells us that this is Purnam, that is Purnam. Purnam has come from Purnam, and if you take away Purnam from Purnam, you are still left with Purnam. Using ordinary logic, it makes no sense unless we accept that Purnam is the same as infinity. Because if you take away infinity from infinity, you are still left with infinity. So, when this Shanti mantra tells us that this is Purnam, that is Purnam, does that mean that all of us are the same? You and me and this table and this light, everything is the same. The answer is yes as well as no. To understand that answer better, let's take a closer look at what exactly is meant by infinity. Infinity stands for that which is beyond the capacity of the mind and the senses. For example, let's take a shepherd who has learned to count up to 20, but no more. He has got 5 sheep. We ask him, how many sheep do you have? He gives you the correct number, 5. Then we gift him 50 sheep and ask him, now how many sheep do you have? He will probably just give a broad smile and say, so many. That to him is infinity. To us it is not infinity. 55 is a number, it's not infinity. But to him, that is infinity. So each individual has a unique level of infinity. I'll call it relative infinity. Of course, the ability to count is just one of the innumerable capacities of the mind and the senses. The shepherd may be lower than us in terms of counting, but he may have much higher capacities in other areas, like for example, smelling the air and predicting the weather, or seeing at night. The fact is that all of us are highly limited beings in one way or another. Even the educated ones, even the geniuses, all of us are highly limited beings. And what the Shanti Mantra is telling us is that each one is at a relative level of infinity. We are all Purnam, but at a relative level of infinity. God represents no limitations whatsoever. Meaning, that entity which has pierced what anyone else might consider not possible to pierce. That is God. We could call it absolute infinity, which exists at the level beyond the mind and the senses. And mystics tell us that the creation does have a purpose. The purpose is the evolution of each relative infinity to absolute infinity. And that will be our focus today. So we will look into the possibility of a mathematical model that shows this universe, this creation, as a model in which everything is evolving from from relative infinity to absolute infinity. As soon as the word evolution is mentioned, the name Darwin comes to mind. The basic difference between Darwin's theory and what I am talking about now is that Darwin dealt with the species, but not with individuals. His theory has no answer to what happens to you and me 100 years, 500 years, what happened to us 500 years back, or what will happen to us 500 years from now. You and me as an individual, not as a species. The unstated assumption is that before our present birth we did not exist, and once we die we will not exist, and in between it's mainly a struggle for existence. Whereas in this model, our reality is seen not as the body, which of course perishes, not even as the mind, but consciousness, which never dies. As Krishna told Arjuna, there never was a time when you were not, and there never will be a time when you will not be. So then, why are we here and what are we doing here? We are evolving. What is evolving? Our mindset is evolving. We often say that we came into this world with nothing and we'll go away with nothing. That is true as far as physical things are concerned, but not as far as the mindset is concerned. Each one of us was born here with a certain mindset based on our earlier evolution, and will die with another mindset based upon how we have reacted to the different events of our life here. And therefore, what we are going to talk about is how in this evolution process, our mindset becomes more and more aware of our consciousness until it reaches a level where it can see the oneness, the Advaita. Interestingly, Albert Einstein, left behind a definition of a human being that says the same thing. We will look into that in great detail, but first let's take a look at what Einstein had to say as far as 20th century science is concerned. He said, in 20th century physics, there is no place for matter but for field. Electrical fields, magnetic fields are things that are taught to us in every science class. We know that they are invisible and that they are spread over all of space and time. So, when Einstein says there is no place in his physics for matter, he's not saying that they don't exist, but that they are something like a reflection or a shadow. If we see ourselves in a mirror, does that reflection exist? Yes and no. But it's only a reflection. If we change our dress, the reflection will become different. Similar is the relationship between field and matter. So Einstein is saying the invisible, the field, is the true reality and gives rise to what is visible to the physical senses. Or we can say the subtle is the reality and gives rise to the gross. Or we can say the infinite is the reality and gives rise to the finite. Or we can say the formless is the reality and gives rise to form. Or we can say the abstract is the reality and gives rise to what seems real to the physical senses. All these are different ways of conveying the one and the same thing. Most scientists would readily agree with all this. And yet, the fact is that we have not really internalized it. For example, in our laboratories, when we do experiments, what are called quantum mechanics experiments, we refer to that as particle physics. We haven't got over that mindset in which matter is seen as reality. Why not? Because modern education does not equip us to handle what one of the greatest founders of 20th century, Niels Bohr, called great truths. Niels Bohr distinguished between small truth and great truth. He said, small truth applies to the gross aspects of reality. And its opposite is a falsehood. For example, the earth, if you take it in its gross form, it is round. So, if the earth is round, the statement, the earth is flat, is a falsehood. Rationality is a very useful tool in distinguishing between truth and falsehood as far as small truths are concerned. But it breaks down when it comes to great truths, which refer to the subtler nature of reality. For example, the same earth, which we call round, is made up of all kinds of things which are made up of molecules, which are made up of atoms, which are made up of subatomic particles, which we call electrons. One example of a subatomic particle. So we say electron is a particle, that's a great truth. Electron is not a particle, is another great truth. There is no contradiction there. It is not irrational. It is what I would call supra-rational. That means it requires the development of the abilities of the brain to see things as a whole. When we are examining something using rationality, we are using the brain's ability to compare and contrast. That's one aspect of the brain. There's another aspect of the brain which is not developed in modern education, which enables us to see everything as a whole rather than as parts. And 20th century science, I would say 20th century physics, was ushered in by a unique set of giant scientists who had developed this aspect of their brain despite modern education giving them no incentives to do so. How many of you have seen the movie Oppenheimer? Movie Oppenheimer? Very few have seen? Oh, okay. So many have seen. Okay. Now, in that movie, Oppenheimer is shown as a young man going to Europe, where he is very bad at experimental physics, very sloppy, breaks all the equipment around. Then he goes to the theoretical class which was being conducted by Niels Bohr. And Niels Bohr tells him, after the class is over, your question was the best question in the class. So he tells Niels Bohr, sir, I asked that because I could not quite follow the algebra. And Niels Bohr says, that doesn't matter. Algebra is like the notes of the music. Real thing is, can you hear that music? And he smiles and says, yes, sir, that I can. He could hear a music. What is music? Anything that generates or tells us about rhythm and harmony. Normally, we associate music with outer music, what gives our ears a feeling of rhythm and harmony. But Oppenheimer was talking of inner music. He could see the invisible behind the visible. And doing so, he could recognize the higher order that exists in the seeming disorder of this world. If we try to look at this world from the gross aspect, there is in science the second law of thermodynamics, which says everything is moving from order to disorder. But then when you see it in the subtler forms, there is a higher order hidden in this seeming disorder. And that music, that rhythm, that harmony, Oppenheimer could hear because he could see the invisible, just like Einstein could. The field was the only reality. Pythagoras referred to this music as music of the spheres. Einstein used the same term and made a very interesting statement. Religious fanatics are intolerant, and so are fanatical atheists, because there is something common between the two. Neither can hear the music of the spheres. To do that, he said, you have to have what he called a cosmic religious experience. That was another great physicist who contributed to 20th century science, Max Planck. On the 60th birthday of Planck, Einstein delivered a lecture titled Principles of Research, in which he insisted that the foundations of science are laid by a small band of scientists who are very different from those whom we normally think are scientists, because they are detached from the world. They do their science not because they want any recognition, any money, nothing like that. They do it because they want to pursue the truth of this world. They want to go to the subtler aspect, and therefore their worldview, their way of looking at the world is very similar to that of the mystic. For example, Max Planck himself said, It's an amazing statement made by a physicist, a leading physicist, that there is no matter as such. But essentially he is saying exactly what Einstein said, that matter is not the reality, field is the reality. And he is taking it one step further. If electrical fields give rise to matter, something must be giving rise to electrical field, something even more subtle. So he's talking of a ladder or hierarchy of subtleness or invisibility. There are many layers of invisibility, subtleness. And if you go to the highest of them, the most subtle, the most invisible, the most infinite, that is what is spirit or consciousness. And he says, I regard matter as a derivative from consciousness. Matter is a derivative from consciousness. Schrödinger agreed and linked it directly to Advaita. For those of you who do not want to trudge through the whole quote, I have put the summary at the end. Essentially what he is saying is that if one were to take his quantum mechanics to its logical conclusion, the only answer one gets is Atman is equal to Brahman, and this is not something peculiar to Hinduism, but belongs to the teachings of all the mystics of all times, of all cultures. So, Advaita is not peculiar to Hinduism. We say Aham Brahmasmi. Islam, they say Ana al-Haq. Christ said, ye are gods and all of you are children of the Most High. Not only that, Christ specified the way of doing it through Advaita. If thine eye be single, which means if you can see that oneness, thy whole body shall be full of light. You will become an enlightened being. And what is the process of doing it? Be still and know that I am God, which is exactly the same as what Kabir, it's a very famous doha, you must have heard it, tan sthir, man sthir, bachan sthir, surat nirat sthir hoy, keh Kabir is palak ko kalp na paave koi, beyond imagination. That is what takes us to infinity. So, real God and real absolute infinity are one and the same. We are relative infinities evolving towards absolute infinity. One of the remarkable person in the Christian tradition had realized the truth of this. I'm sure you have all heard the name of George Bernard Shaw. And he put it very nicely and beautifully. That each one of us is work in progress, progressing towards Godhood. All we have to do is change our attitude from caring only for our personal ends, from selfishness to working for the purpose of the entire creation. From selfishness to selflessness. That is what evolution is. So a mathematical model that points to Advaita can help in overcoming religious divisions by enabling us to better understand our own religion scientifically, the way that George Bernard Shaw had understood his Christianity. Each one of us, whatever religion we belong to, if we go deep into it, using logic and science, it will help us to overcome the polarizations that we are witnessing these days. Another big advantage is in solving ecological problems such as climate change. Because ecology and spirituality share what can be called the holistic worldview. And 20th century science is confirming its validity. 19th century science spoke of this world being made up of building blocks, the smallest building block being the atom. 20th century science has actually abandoned that. World is seen as a network of continuously interacting fields. And mystics have always viewed the world that way. Continuously interacting fields, or you can say a hierarchy of nested ecosystems. Now, here, hierarchy does not mean superiority, but inclusiveness, based upon a symbiotic relationship. For example, let's take our body and let's say the lungs. Our body, in this way of looking at things, the holistic way, is not just the RNA, DNA molecules. It's a field operating over all of space and time. Similarly, our lung is also not just made up of molecules. It's another field operating over all of space and time. In one sense, the lungs contains the body. The body contains the lungs. But that does not mean that the body is superior to the lungs. They have a symbiotic relationship. If the lung does not exist, the body cannot exist. So, when we use phrases like Aham Brahmasmi or Anahal Hak, it is not a reference to someone who is superior to the others, but someone who subsumes one and all. And so another way of looking at God is the largest ecosystem that subsumes everything. Just like our body subsumes our lungs, our heart, our hands. Similarly, God refers to that ecosystem which subsumes all other ecosystems and with whom it has a symbiotic relationship. There is a verse in the Kabir tradition that describes this relationship very beautifully, which Shanti, Nishant and Dilip will now present to you.
हम सब माही हम सब माही हम सब माही सकल हम माही सकल हम माही हम थे और दूसरा नाही हम सब माही हम तीन लोक में हमारा पसारा तीन लोक में हमारा थे और दूसरा नाही हम सब माही हम सब माही हम.
I love to hear the Sunad group sing because I find their music to be very soulful. What is the difference between soulful music and soulless music? Some of you may have heard of Kaushiki Chakravarti, the musician. She has made a very interesting and, in my opinion, important difference between the craft, the art, and the origin of music. What we see and hear outside, the musician singing, the audience listening, clapping, all that is a craft of music. And Kaushiki said that for soulful music, the musician does not think or focus on the craft at all. The musician has to focus on the art which arises from the origin. And what is the origin of music? Real music is the inner silence prior to the start of the performance. Before the music is expressed outwardly, it has to be captured inside, in the inner silence. And that is how Kaushiki has linked music with spirituality. Similar is the case with mathematics. There is the craft, there is the art, and there is the origin of mathematics. Solving equations, making calculations, proving, disproving theorems, these are all part of the craft of mathematics. And if we focus solely on that, we get soulless mathematics. The really great mathematicians have focused on the art and the origin of mathematics. Paul Dirac said, I am more interested in my mathematical equations having beauty, even if they do not fit the facts emerging from experiment. That is small truth. Beauty is a great truth. Ramanujan went one step further, that I do all my mathematics for the sake of God. I am trying to express what God is. Because that is the origin of mathematics. Infinity. He was called the man who knew infinity. He was known as that among all the mathematicians, Ramanujan, the man who knew infinity. But most people do not look at mathematics that way. However, there are great mathematicians, and I'll take one example. 20th century, there was Hermann Weyl, and he in fact defined the origin of mathematics by linking it with divinity. He said mathematics is the science of the infinite, and infinity is the same as divinity. And historically, if we trace its origin, as far as Western mathematics is concerned, he traced it to the Greek term apeiron, which is exactly the same as Advaita. And he said it comes from the Orient. In fact, if we look at the origin of arithmetic and algebra, this actually becomes quite evident. Arithmetic deals with numbers, and where do numbers originate? Draw a line, select any point on the line as 0 and any length as 1, and as soon as you do that, each point on that line is one unique number. So for example, on this line, each point represents one unique number. So all points have originated from that line. That line represents infinity. The points represent finiteness. This tells us why mathematical models have been so successful in reproducing physical reality. Because actually, physical reality, everything what we call Dvaita, it's all actually linked together. At the physical level, we are all siblings of divinity in just the way that the numbers are siblings from infinity. That is why mathematical models have succeeded in reproducing physical reality. And algebra plays the role of expressing that connection. For example, mass and energy. They are seen as completely different by us, but algebra shows us that they are linked together. In a gas, pressure and temperature, they are linked together, though they seem to be different. Algebra plays that role. And its origin of algebra is from the Persian or Arabic term al-zabr, which means reunion of broken parts. So that is the job of algebra, to bring together what seem completely unrelated things and put them together as one. So if we take this process to its logical conclusion and have an algebraic equation that can link everything and anyone together, it's a mathematical model that points to Advaita, because everything is linked together. The stumbling block is the way that we have confined geometry today to what we call Euclidean forms. Euclidean geometry means dealing with lines, circles, triangles, ellipses, and so on. Interesting thing which most of us don't realize is that in nature, hardly anything, in fact I can even say nothing, follows Euclidean geometry. Leaves, flowers, trees, our own bodies, nothing follows Euclidean geometry. There was a great mathematician in the last century, Mandelbrot, who was very agitated about this. And you see, most people regard mathematics as very cold, dry, soulless. And he said the reason is because it does not have the ability, the way it is structured today, to tell us the reality of the cloud, a mountain, a coastline, or a tree. We feel so much at peace with ourselves when we go into nature and can see these. But we don't feel at peace with ourselves when we have to solve an algebraic equation, because we are dealing with Euclidean forms. Mandelbrot not only bemoaned this, but made a huge contribution to correcting this by building on the work of another very great but rather unknown scientist. Richardson was a polymath. That means mathematician, physicist, meteorologist, psychologist, all rolled into one. But even more important, he was a relentless crusader against all conflicts and wars. He did something which even an Einstein or a Schrödinger did not have the guts to do. Whenever, after working out a research paper, he felt that that research paper, its conclusions, can be used for designing any weapon, he would just tear that paper and throw it into the waste paper basket. Nobody knows today what he had written. He was that much of a crusader against wars. And because of that, as part of that mission, he took up a project to scientifically measure borders between countries, because that's the most frequent cause of wars. In those days, Portugal and Spain had a border dispute, just like China and India are having today. Portugal said, our border measures 987 kilometers. And Spain said, no, it measures 1,214 kilometers. And Richardson felt that, look, if I can use my science and come up with an objective way of telling exactly how much a border measures, that will help to bring down the chances of conflict. So to do that, he chose the British island, which is an undisputed border because it's an island, and he measured its coastline by first using a 100-meter scale, and the conclusion he reached was 2,800 kilometers. Then he reduced that scale to 50 meters, and the conclusion he reached was 3,400 kilometers. Natural, because the scale is a line, Euclidean. The coastline is not. So logic tells us that if we reduce the measuring scale to something very, very small, let's say 1 millimeter, we will be able to arrive at the accurate answer. And here was Richardson's great discovery. He discovered, no, how much ever small you make your measuring scale, it does not reduce itself to Euclidean form. You cannot measure the correct length of a coastline or a border that way. So how do you do it? He used abstract mathematics to prove that the British coastline has a length of infinity. That seems very difficult to absorb, isn't it? We can see something, how can it be infinity? And as we shall see, Mandelbrot later on shown that this is true even of a leaf or a tree. It's something very difficult to understand. But that is why mystics refer to this, our present ability to understand reality, as Maya, illusion. That we cannot overcome just by making our finer and finer measurements using our physical senses. We have to tap resources within our brain that are not related to the physical senses. And Mandelbrot made a great contribution in this direction by inventing the notion of fractals in mathematics. Fractals refer to what are called fractional dimensions, like one dimension, 2 dimension, we can understand. What is 1.23 dimensions, 2.77 dimensions? We can't understand that. To understand this better, we have to recognize that dimension is a measure of the space occupied. For example, a line. If you draw a line, it hardly occupies any space. So it's got 1 dimension. You take a thin piece of paper, it occupies more space than a line, but much less than a sphere. So it's got 2 dimensions. You take the thin piece of paper, make it into a sphere, the surface area still remains the same, but the volume it occupies is more. So it's called 3 dimensions. Now if we take that sphere and crumple it, there are many kinks formed in that. So the surface area increases considerably. Everything in nature is of that pattern. And that is needed for life to exist on earth. I'll illustrate that with a simple example. Our lungs, it's supposed to have a dimension of 2.97. What does that mean? In fact, actually, if we take a human lungs and measure its volume, it would be the size of a few tennis balls. If we take a micrometer screw gauge and measure its surface area, it will be that of a few tennis courts. You can imagine how much surface area there is. That kind of surface area is needed in order for the lungs to be able to process the air needed for us to be alive. If the lungs was Euclidean in structure, none of us would be alive. Now, what is really interesting and important to recognize is that, in the earlier one we showed a sphere having kinks. Nature created kinks are far more intricate than what we humans can ever create. They are repetitions of one pattern ad infinitum. You go however small you can, you cannot find the origin of that pattern, because that origin lies in something beyond the physical. That is why mathematically you can prove that the surface area is actually infinity. Because infinity, God, consciousness, life, these are all synonyms. And when we discover that the surface area of our lungs is infinity, or that the coastline of England is infinity, it is just a way of intellectually recognizing that consciousness, which represents infinity, oneness, is hiding itself in what seems to be lifeless. Therefore, Mandelbrot put it this way: a fractal is a way of seeing infinity. It is not necessary that we resort to abstract mathematics to realize this. The other option is careful observation at the minute level. Let's take, for example, a fern. Notice that there are no straight lines, nothing Euclidean in it. Also that the leaves resemble the bark. Just like from the bark there are branches, similarly from the leaves there is a branching out. Both are derived from the same pattern. And this is true of everything in nature. If we keep zooming in, the smaller we go, however small, we will still see that same pattern. So everything that we see in nature, clouds, flowers, our own human organs, they are all very complex objects, but they're repetitions of one pattern repeating itself over and over and over again. And that origin of that pattern is not at any physically observable level. Mandelbrot stressed that this has a message not just for mathematicians, but for each and every human being. It enables us to see our own world differently. Let me take a very practical example. Let's say you are the Prime Minister of Israel, and some people calling themselves Hamas fighters have intruded into one part of your country and have done all kinds of atrocities. Now, Mandelbrot is saying there are two ways of looking at it. Think of what you see, which means all those atrocities, those fighters doing this. Then the reaction will be one, saying, let's get rid of those fighters, and then I am securing my borders. But there is another way. Think not of what you see, but of what it took to produce what you see. The mindset that created that intrusion. See, each of us is not just a body. There is a body, there is a mind, and there is consciousness. Consciousness is something which we are not able to see easily, but at least to some extent we can see our own mind, and in a very feeble way the minds of others. So what Mandelbrot is saying is that mathematics and science, once you recognize the fractal nature of reality, is telling you that there is wisdom in trying to look at what has produced what you see. That is wisdom. For example, Lincoln put it this way: do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? If you destroy, let's say, every single Hamas fighter, you are still not destroying the mindset that created this. The problem is not going to end. But if you make them your friends, then the problem ends. But in order to do this, we have to change our way of looking at ourselves and life in a very fundamental way. We have to cease looking at the physical as the only reality. Let me give you one simple example. I just met some of you, like for example, Sampath Kumar after a gap of say 15 years. And I hug him and say, hello Sampath, how are you? Someone were to ask me, you haven't seen him for 15 years. His hair is no longer as black as it used to be. How do you know that is the same Sampath Kumar? I'll say, no, it is the same. His face is the same. Right? Wrong. A professor of anatomy, and this is not a new research, 1935, Yale University, a professor of anatomy, did a most interesting research to show that all the molecules in our body are turning over. For example, he says, when we meet a friend we have not seen for 6 months, there is not one molecule in his face which was there when we last saw him. Not one molecule. So then, how is it that I think that Sampath Kumar has the same face? Because there is an invisible force which puts those new molecules using that same pattern. The pattern is the important thing. The pattern is repeated. So essentially, 20th century anatomy, 20th century physics, and 20th century geometry all are telling us the same message. Fields are responsible for matter or body, which means infinite creates the finite. A few days back, I don't know if some of you did it, but many people celebrated the 99th birthday of Mohammed Rafi, the singer. And I happened to be hearing a program, and they replayed his song, which says, Tareef karun kya uski, jisne tujhe banaya. The boy is telling the girl, I'm not calling you beautiful. I'm praising that invisible thing that has arranged or is continuously arranging your molecules in such a nice and such a... Now, does that mean that that boy could actually see the infinite in the girl, the divinity in the girl? The answer is yes, provided, and that's a very big if, that there was no craftiness in what he was trying to do. If it was just a ploy to capture her, either physically or even mentally, to possess her, then he can't see the infinite. But if he was focusing only on the art or the origin, then yes, he can see the infinite, he can see the divine. And William Blake put that across very nicely. It's all about inner purity. If the mind is pure, to the extent that the mind is pure, our consciousness rises from relative infinity to absolute infinity. And when we do so, we can see the whole world in a grain of sand, our hand. Which is what that Kabir song that the three of them presented to us conveys to us. Jalaluddin Rumi conveyed the same thing using a very beautiful analogy. Of the light and the lamp. The light is the essence. And he says it comes from beyond space and time. The light of each one of us comes from beyond space and time. If we focus on that light, on that essence, on that consciousness, on that life force, then we rise above duality. As he puts it, we are delivered from the duality inherent in the finite body. And he connects numbers and plurality versus consciousness and infinity. So if the scientist focuses on the infinite nature of everything in nature, he goes beyond the craft of mathematics. Kabir had composed a beautiful song conveying the same thing using a very simple analogy of the villager going every day to fill water in a pitcher from the river. The three of them will now present that song to us, but before they start, maybe it is in order to have a break, short break. If you can come back in 5 minutes, that will be good, but maximum 10 minutes please, so that you can stretch yourself, and if you need, you can use the toilet. Okay? This second song of Kabir that I have selected is a little more intricate and difficult to understand compared to the first one, because it has got a deep, almost an esoteric meaning. Therefore, I have put up the deeper meaning of many of these words. So as you hear the song, if you can please keep this deeper meaning in mind, then after they sing it, we will look into that meaning.
हे जी हृदय माही आरसी जी रे, हे रे रे, और मुख देखा नहीं जाए, मुख तो तब ही देखिए जब दिल की दुविधा जाए।
सब आया एक ही घाट से और उतरा एक ही बाट, बीच में दुविधा पड़ गई तो हो गए बाराबाट। घाटे पानी सब भरे, अवघट भरे न को, अवघट घाट कबीर का भरे सो निर्मल हो।
हिंदू कहूँ तो मैं नाही, मुसलमान भी नाही, पंच तत्व का पुतला और ये भी खेले माई। तारा रंग महल में अजब शहर में, आजा रे हंसा भाई निर्गुण राजा पे सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। तारा सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। तारा रंग महल में अजब शहर में, आजा रे हंसा भाई निर्गुण राजा पे सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। आहा सिरगुण सेज बिछाई।
अरे हारे भाई देवलिया में देव नाही, झालर कुटे गरज कसी।
अरे हारे भाई देवलिया में देव नाही, झालर कुटे गरज कसी। हो थारा रंग महल में अजब शहर में, आजा रे हंसा भाई निर्गुण राजा पे सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। आहा सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। अरे हारे भाई बेहद की तो गम नाही, नूगरा से सेन कसी।
अरे हारे भाई बेहद की तो गम नाही, नूगरा से सेन कसी।
थारा रंग महल में अजब शहर में, आजा रे हंसा भाई निर्गुण राजा पे सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। आहा सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। अरे हारे भाई अमृत प्याला भर पाओ, भाईला से भ्रांत कसी। अरे हारे भाई अमृत प्याला भर पाओ, भाईला से भ्रांत कसी। थारा रंग महल में अजब शहर में, आजा रे हंसा भाई सिर गुण सेज बिछाए, यहाँ सिर गुण सेज बिछाए। हरे हरे भाई कहे कबीर विचार, सेन माहे सेन मिली। हरे हरे भाई कहे कबीर विचार, सेन माहे सेन मिली। रंग महल में अजब शहर में, आजा रे हंसा भाई, निर्गुण राजा पे सिर गुण सेज बिछाए। रंग महल में अजब शहर में, आजा रे हंसा भाई, निर्गुण राजा पे सिर गुण सेज बिछाए, सिर गुण सेज बिछाए, सिर गुण सेज बिछाए।
हृदय माही आरसी पर मुख देखा नहीं जाए. Using his mystical insight, Kabir is telling us exactly what that professor of anatomy concluded after all that research. That is, that we cannot see the true face of anybody until we recognize the infinite behind the finite. He then conveys what Mandelbrot did using two very powerful words, Nirguna and Saguna. Nirgun refers to formless, that which has got no form. And Sagun, you can say that which has got form, or you can say that which has got properties. Anything that has got properties, whether we call it living or non-living things, anything that has got properties is Sagun and has to occupy a form. Kabir is telling us through this song, Nirgun Raja pe Sirgun Sej Bichai. Nirgun is the formless. And he says that is the Raja, that is the reality, that is the king. On that, what we have done is Sarguna Sej Bichai. We have put a covering of the form. Then he tells us how to uncover. He uses the word Bhat. Bhat means compartments. As soon as we compartmentalize ourselves, he takes the example of Hindu and Musliman, but it can be any other division based upon country, caste, gender, even human versus nature. Any division that we do, any compartments that we associate with, creates that covering. How to uncover? He uses three very similar sounding words to convey his message. Ghat, Ghat and Avaghat. Ghat is the riverfront to which the villager goes every day to fill water. So it's just like you go every day to fill water. Similarly, when you come here into this world, you have come here into what mystics refer to as Bhavasagar, an ocean. We often say ocean of phenomena, but a simpler, better way to look at it in today's world would be that ocean which has got all kinds of vibrations, like the vibrations or the field that powers our smartphone is one kind. There are all kinds of such vibrations, unimaginable range of frequencies. So he says you have a choice, just like when you go to the river to fill any water that you want in your bucket. That's up to you. Similarly, when you come to this Bhavasagar, you have a choice of filling yourself with those vibrations at the level of the Ghat or the Avaghat. Ghat means bound. Avaghat means boundless. As soon as you choose, make that choice, what kind of vibrations do you want in your own brain to happen? You are deciding whether you want to confine yourself to a compartment or go beyond it. Whether you want to associate with a part of the creation or the whole of the creation. Interestingly, Einstein left behind a definition of a human being that conveys exactly the same thing. I regard it as an even greater legacy of Einstein than the theory of relativity. So I would like to look at it in great detail, and for that I have divided it into 3 parts. The first part says, each of us, the way we look at ourselves, because we are looking at ourselves as a compartment, we see ourselves as part limited in space and time. For example, if we associate ourselves with our body was born at a certain point in time, will die at another point in time. So if we associate ourselves only with a body, we have limited it in space and time. And this limitation makes us experience this world as something separate from the rest. Our thoughts and feelings are something separate from the rest. Separation, duality arises because of our association with the part. And he refers to this duality as an optical delusion of our consciousness. That means the reality is oneness, it is Advaita, not duality. How did he reach such a conclusion? The words space and time that he has used here give us the clue to that. Because all his scientific research was also a consequence of his different notion of space and time than what we normally have. And how did he arrive at it? He told his son-in-law, I arrived at it in a vision, very similar to a mystic vision, because both are experiences of timelessness. As we learn to quieten our mind and purify our mind, we graduate from a feeling of the flow of time to timelessness. All mystics have experienced it. For example, Rumi referred to his experiences as one where time does not exist. Nanak used the term akal. Kal means time. Akal means that which is beyond time. And Einstein has said exactly the same thing. He said for a convinced physicist, that means not just someone who has understood who has mastered the mathematics of his theories, but someone who has really convinced himself of that reality. The distinction between past, present and future is an illusion, though a stubborn one. This feeling that we have, that time is flowing, it's so central to our functioning. So that is an illusion. And it is from that realization, from that vision, that all his theories flowed. But when such theories are verified, nobody bothers about the vision. And therefore, in today's world, there is a huge disconnect between how theories are arrived at, especially the theories about the invisible side of reality, and how they are verified. For example, the general theory of relativity was verified by Eddington, who went to Africa and conducted some experiments with the sun. But he did have the spiritual background, he was a Quaker, to have experienced the same vision that Einstein did. But he didn't do that, because that's not the way that science functions today. In my opinion, this has stunted the growth of science, because many great truths means things about the subtle or the invisible side of reality, have been glozed over, have not been seen as a possible reference to reality. And in fact, even quantum mechanics, but for an accident that happened in a laboratory of the Bell Telephone Labs in New Jersey it would not have seen the light of the day. So we would not have had all our electronic equipments, our computers, our smartphones, had it not been just for that accident, because otherwise the world of science was ignoring what de Broglie was suggesting, that matter, like electrons, can be a field, not just matter. But the really devastating consequences are for society at large. All of you use Google Maps, right? Would I be right in assuming that you use it mainly to save time? Right? Now, many of you would know that the technology behind Google Maps is called GPS. Would anyone know the theoretical basis of GPS? No? It is the general theory of relativity. The same thing which Einstein said, if you are convinced of it, the distinction between past, present and future is an illusion. So, we are using that theory which tells us that time is an illusion to promote the rat race. Isn't that ironic? The fact is that we have made use of the insights of people like Einstein. We hold them in great reverence, we put them on a pedestal, but we have ignored their message. We use their theories in a very narrow way to manipulate the gross and the physical aspects of reality around us, and see them as means to provide us more and more material comforts. We don't look at the vision, at the philosophy, at the message of those theories. So this has resulted in a very materialistic definition of human progress. Continuously increase the consumption of goods and services. This is the way all societies define development and progress, irrespective of which ideology they belong to. Communism or capitalism or socialism, democracy or dictatorship, even the Islamic republics say, okay, let's use science to accumulate more goods, material goods, so that we can all become richer human beings. I'm sure many of you have heard of John Maynard Keynes, right? The economist. I have great respect for him because he is the only economist I know of who had the guts to call a spade a spade. He did not mince words when describing what this definition of human progress means or demands from each one of us. We must pretend to ourselves and to everyone that foul is fair, because foul is useful and fair is not. Avarice, that means greed. Usury, that means charging the highest rates possible, which means exploitation. And precaution, which means never trusting the other, mistrust. These must be our gods for a little longer still, for only they can lead us out of the tunnel of economic necessity into daylight. That is the philosophy of modern progress or development. It's not that, at least most of us don't really approve of greed, exploitation or mistrust. But because of the compulsions of what we have called progress, we have developed a schizophrenic attitude towards these things. In theory, we say, these are bad. But in practice, for example, we tell our children, honesty is the best policy. But we know that if the boy sticks to real honesty scrupulously, he's not going to make it very far, certainly not in business, certainly not in politics, perhaps not even in a government job. We usually point the finger at the system or the other for this state of affairs, but the truth is we are all responsible. Take, for example, my own case. When I did my electrical engineering, my professor told me electricity is the flow of certain particles called electrons. But my physics professor told me electrons are not particles. I didn't go back and ask the first professor, but then if they are not particles, what exactly is electricity? No, I just got my degree and embarked on a career. This attitude of not going deep into what we have studied has created a really terrible situation today. My generation of techies, and I'm not talking only of Indians, the world over, we have ignored the message, the deeper message of 20th century science. And therefore, quantum mechanics has led to the bomb, nuclear bomb, when it should actually have led to the Buddha. If you look at what Schrödinger or even Niels Bohr or Heisenberg and certainly Einstein talked of, it's actually trying to lead us to the nobler side of life. But we have allowed it to develop to develop nuclear bombs. The result is that people of my generation are leaving behind for the younger generation problems which are very deep and not easy to solve. Problems like, we have enough nuclear weapons in the world to annihilate ourselves 100 times over. What we saw in Hiroshima is nothing compared to what will happen if modern nuclear weapons are used. Apart from nuclear weapons, ecological changes, climate change, for example. They are very serious problems which the younger generation will have to tackle. And in fact, every new technology such as AI carries very great dangers for one and all. But despite all these, I also see a silver lining, and that is certain individuals that I notice in the younger generation. I can take a specific example here, sitting in front of me, Nishant. He combines academic brilliance with great creativity, great talent in multiple fields such as music and science. He is, of course, a very good human being, and has a social conscience wanting to help humanity rather than just enter the rat race. I am not saying there are lots of such people, but lots are not needed. After all, how many people did it take to bring about the quantum revolution which has completely changed the way that we live? Just a handful. We often think that revolutions are created by the masses, but the truth is what Margaret Mead said. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And when you look at it from that angle, the problems that the younger generation is facing may become blessings in disguise, because adversity reveals genius, whereas prosperity conceals it. If we are too well off in life, our creative talents don't come to the fore. But when we are faced with existential problems, we know we have to find a solution. And then the creativity comes to the fore. And I think what is most promising is the big way in which women have come up. When I was a student, There wasn't a single girl with me in IIT. Why IIT? Even at Stanford, there wasn't a single girl. But now things are changing. Girls are getting educated in a big way and are taking to science and technology and doing probably better than the boys. And to me, the greatest thing to celebrate is the feminine psyche, because it is the feminine psyche which is attuned naturally to oneness, to Advaita. I am not saying all women have got it and no men have got it, but the feminine psyche, it's like the yin-yang symbol of the Chinese thing, is there in both. But it is there more predominantly in the women. And when I see the ability of some of them in mathematics, and Indians in particular are very good naturally at mathematics, I see great hope for a new kind of model that is likely to emerge. A model, see, today's mathematical models treat every unit as a finite entity because we have confined it to Euclidean forms, like a solar system, the Earth, Mars, Sun. They are all seen as finite entities, not as infinite entities. But in the new model that I have in mind, they would be treated as fractals, as infinite. And once that is done, because to understand fractal takes us to the level of infinity. Infinity and Advaita are the same. So Advaita then will become explicit in that mathematics rather than implicit as it is in 20th century science. It would essentially be a model of evolution, which means a process. Evolution is a process. So everything in the creation will be seen as having a purpose. Relative infinities moving towards absolute infinity. And in that sense, this model would be very different from what the kind of models that science has been used to. But this doesn't mean that current models will be abandoned. When quantum mechanics got accepted, Newtonian mechanics was not abandoned. It became a subset of quantum mechanics. Similarly, if a model based upon the notion of fractals or infinity comes into the picture, it doesn't mean that quantum mechanics or whatever we have done so far in science will be abandoned. And this leads me to an interesting and important point. All progress in science can be traced to the discovery of a fundamental constant. For example, Planck's constant led to quantum mechanics. All the electronic gadgets, the communication devices, smartphones would not have been possible if Planck had not discovered this number, this magic number. And so its discovery is seen as a great contribution to our knowledge, which is true, but it also hides our ignorance. Why is Planck constant this particular number? Why, I think there are some 33 zeros here. Why 33 zeros? Why not 25 zeros or 45 zeros? Why 6626? Why not 5344? Today, science has no answers to this, not only about Planck's constant, but they have about 30 to 50 fundamental constants which describe the universe. No answer to this at all. In this context, I want to draw your attention to very interesting work of a doctor and medical scientist by name Robert Lanza. What Robert Lanza has shown is that if you take any of these constants and change them a little bit. Let's say Planck's constant, you increase it by 0.05%, the universe will cease. Decrease it by 0.05%, the universe, life will cease. So these constants are designed precisely to enable life here to exist. It's a very important discovery. In the mystic worldview, there is something called Pralaya, Mahapralaya. How does it happen? Simple. Change what we think now are fundamental constants a little bit, and the world ceases. So these constants are therefore a way of hiding consciousness in what seems to be lifeless. So what I am envisaging therefore is a science of life that includes matter and from which fundamental constants that we are accustomed to today can be derived. How does that happen? When we recognize the infinite nature of anything and everything, and all of everything as a process of evolution of relative infinity to absolute infinity. When we looked at the shepherd example, I said that compared to the shepherd, we are at a higher level of infinity. So there are levels of infinity. Normally, we don't think of levels of infinity. Even in mathematics, they didn't used to think of levels of infinity. For example, the number of points in a line is infinity. The number of, let's say, odd numbers or even numbers is also infinity. Both were seen, no attempt was made to differentiate between the two. But recently, there has been recognition, starting with the work of one Dr. George Cantor, that the number of points in a line is infinitely more than the number of numbers in an arithmetic series. So at least 3 levels of infinity Cantor has identified. And they would form what I would regard as the sets. One, mathematics, essential of mathematics is sets. Everything in mathematics can be reduced to sets. These sets so far have been of finite numbers. Instead of that, infinite numbers. Of course, whatever I am saying is really just speculation or a dream. But, in 1963, Martin Luther King had made a speech with that very title, I Have a Dream. Some of you may be aware of that. From 1965 onwards, for a few years, I lived in the United States. And one thing that was obvious to me was that blacks do not occupy any positions of importance, either in government or even in a corporation. If anyone had told me then that 50 years from now, a black man will occupy the White House, I would have said impossible. But that happened. So dreams have their value. And if such a dream were to become a reality, I see 5 huge benefits for humanity. 3 of them I have already talked about. Ecological models which will help to bring about a different kind of technologies that would be in tune with nature, reducing conflicts and other polarizations in the name of religion, and within science itself, enabling more great truths to be discovered. I now want to talk about 2 more, giving us a higher, nobler purpose in life and increasing our own creativity by leaps and bounds. Einstein deals with both these in the remaining part of his definition of the human being. The second part says this: in the first part he said, if we confine ourselves to a part of the universe, our identity, that's delusion. Now he specifies how we can get over that delusion. Says this delusion is imprisoning us. And to get over it, we need to widen our circle of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. In other words, identify ourselves not with our own body or family or community or even country, but make it as wide as possible. Which, incidentally, is exactly what Bernard Shaw said is the route to becoming God. So, anyone who is creative, who is able to see the invisible, is able to discover that there is a higher purpose to life than what we normally think of when we define progress purely in material terms. And interestingly, that higher purpose of Advaita or oneness was also the original meaning of the term university. Universes turned to one. That was the idea of a university. The students appointed their professors, those who professed a way to attain this aim of oneness. Getting degrees was not the idea. So, whether we look at the mystic vision or at how people like Einstein and Bernard Shaw view this world, or the original idea of the university, what emerges is that this world is like a classroom. Just like we enter a classroom, we have to exit the classroom. We are never all the time in a classroom. So similarly, this world we have to enter and exit, no choice. But at the end of our sojourn here, question is, have we learnt the real thing? What we came here to learn. And that has to do with oneness. Just like when we enter a class, we also make friends, we have fights, we have parties. But that's not the purpose why we enter a classroom. Similarly, the purpose of our entering this classroom called life begins to be seen in a very different way once we recognize the reality of this oneness as the ultimate goal that we are evolving towards. One of the best descriptions of it comes from, Lebanon is now in crisis in various ways, but it's produced some really wonderful mystics. One of them was Mikhail Naimi. Fairly recently he lived, and he put it so beautifully. He said, there are these laws, physical laws that we are familiar with, laws of electromagnetism, gravity and so on. They are subsets of other laws, which are evident at the more invisible level. There is a hierarchy of these laws. They are subsets of other subsets and so on. Final law, of which all the laws are subsets, is the law of love. So you live that you may learn to love. You love that you may learn to live. Until you have learned to love, you really do not know how to live. No other lesson is required of man. And what is it to love? But for the lover to forever absorb the beloved so that the twain be one. So that oneness, which means true love, is the elimination of our own self. And that leads to a very different definition of human progress. Again, I will quote Einstein to specify that definition, that human progress is measured by the sense in which we obtain liberation from the self, rather than how much material goods we accumulate. Normally, when we see these things, we see no connection between all this and science and technology. But there is. And Mahatma Gandhi specified that connection in a very interesting way. Gandhiji essentially talked of two kinds of science, the science of matter and the science of life. He did not dismiss the science of matter, not at all. He said, seemingly impossible have become possible within living memory. Let me take an example. 1960s, when I was young, India had a major food problem. We were importing food. In places like Bihar, there were famines. So, we solved that problem through what is called the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution involved the science of matter, wherein we tried to study the plants through their chemicals. And certainly, we have now become an exporter of wheat and other food grains. So it's seemingly impossible becoming possible within 50 years. But what is becoming slowly evident is that was a short-term gain at huge long-term costs. Costs in terms of major soil erosion. Places like Punjab, which produce the maximum grains, are also having the maximum soil erosion. There is a decrease in productivity of the same soil. Agriculture has gone into the hands of a few, mainly MNCs. Social inequalities have increased. And most tragic of all, we are dependent on transportation and oil even for getting our daily food needs. So there is a problem in Ukraine, and the whole world has a big food problem. What Gandhi is saying is, there is an alternative, the science of life. How does a seed become a tree? Today, we really don't know, because it involves an understanding of the invisible forces around us. Seed becoming a tree. And once we have got some kind of a feel for that, we don't even have to master it. Once we have some kind of feel for that, we can produce an abundance of vegetables and fruits even in conditions of bad climate, poor soil, droughts and floods. So as Gandhi puts it, the victories of physical science would be nothing against the victory of the science of life, which is summed up in love, which is the law of our being. But accessing the invisible or the science of life demands a completely different mindset compared to what we are used to, and Einstein specifies that in the third and last part of his definition. In the second part, he specified the process of getting over the delusion as increasing our compassion to include one and all. In the third part, he begins by saying nobody is able to achieve this completely. It's not a goal that can ever be achieved. So we need to get away from our present mindset of achievement orientation, which is all about the material and the finite. For anything that has to do with the non-material and the infinite, completely different mindset is required, and Gandhiji specified it very beautifully. The goal ever recedes from us. First of all, we have to recognize that we can never reach the goal. If we move towards the goal will go back. That is the nature of infinity. We may call Ramanujan the man who knew infinity, but if he feels I know infinity, he has lost the game. It's just like humility. We might think that someone is very humble, but if he feels I am humble, that's best proof that he is not humble. Same thing with God realization. We may think that Kabir has realized God, but what did Kabir feel about himself? Na kachuk kiya, na kari saka, na kachuk karne yog. Jo kuch kiya so hari kiya, duja thape log. जो कुछ किया सो हरि किया, मैं कुछ किया नहीं, कहीं कहीं जो मैं किया तुम ही से मुझ माही. It's a very beautiful way of explaining what was going on in his mind. He takes no credit for anything that he is doing. Gandhi had used a phrase, reducing oneself to a cipher. Cipher means zero. And these two things go together. If we want to pursue infinity, we should not ever pursue infinity. We should try to become a zero. If we want nothing, we get everything. Absolute nothing means absolute everything. So that is where the process of evolution is. And therefore, Gandhi says, the greater the progress, the greater the recognition of our unworthiness. See, both zero and infinity are processes. And as these two are, they are not numbers. Very often we treat them as ordinary numbers. They are not numbers, they are processes. You can never reach zero, you can never reach infinity. And all of us are also processes. None of us is finished product. We are all changing all the time. Our mindset is never the same. We may not realize it, just like a child who is growing does not realize by putting his hand on his head that he is growing. So just like that, we are also growing. We are also evolving. No one is there who is not evolving. And this evolution process can be captured better through a model that stresses zeros and infinities, because they are both processes. And in fact, Ramanujan, I talked of a model, Ramanujan had talked of it even at that time, not exactly as a model, but he said everything in the creation is 0 times infinity. It doesn't make sense to us, right? What is 0 times infinity? In mathematics, if that question is asked, we will say undetermined. But to the mystic, it is determined. Because both 0 and infinity tell us what we need to know about ourselves. That the more we can go towards 0, the more of infinity we will be able to imbibe. And Einstein says that striving for such is in itself a part of the liberation and a foundation for inner security. And he says it out of personal experience. We often extol him for the theory of relativity. As he told his son-in-law, it came in a vision. He also told his son-in-law what brought about that vision, what preceded, what we could call the prerequisites to having that vision. There was a massive increase in his sense of unworthiness. As he puts it, all confidence disappears. It's over, I told myself. Everything is useless. I haven't obtained any results. But the important thing is, he still kept at it. He didn't give up the effort. So, as Gandhi put it, satisfaction lies in the effort, not in the attainment. Full effort is full victory. So slowly, the focus is only on the effort. What in our tradition we call nishkama karma. Doing something without whether or not it results in anything. And when that happens, how does Einstein put it? That is when the thing came about. His theory of relativity. That is when the thing came about. He doesn't say, I discovered the theory of relativity. No. The I goes out of the picture. That is the important thing. The more the I can go out of the picture, the more we will make the discoveries of reality. And Rumi put it this way, that long. that the secrets that lead to creativity happen to the extent that we can get rid of our own narrow self. Then the narrow self gets replaced by the higher, the greater self. And this is actually evident even in creative people whom we know quite well. Among the musicians, for example, Zakir Hussain, the Tabalchi. I once heard an interview where someone was just praising the, if you see him full of energy and this thing, someone was praising that and saying, wow, what a great Tabalchi you are, how well you play it. And his immediate and I think unthought out response was, I am not playing it is the tabla playing through me. And one becomes an instrument of that higher power. And that brings me to the fifth advantage of such a model, a huge surge in our level of creativity. Over the last 300 years, we have developed the analytical part of our brain. But our brain has got just, as the mystics say, everything is hidden in the forehead. Its potential is fantastic. And what we have neglected is the holistic part of it, which contains the root to creativity. Kabir has a beautiful song that explains this, starting with Yahatan Thaat Tambureka. Yahatan is this body. When he talks of this body, it's not just, we often think of the body mainly as different parts, but the main thing in the body is the forehead, because that's the CPU. All the commands through which the body functions comes from that. And the CPU has a program. Our mindset is the thing that CPU the program to function. And he says, Yahatan Thaat. Thaat is a very interesting word in, the musicians know it better than me. That which produces the raga. So he says, this body or forehead of yours produces a raga. Whenever we are existing here, we may not hear the inner music the way that Oppenheimer could hear. And yet, it is producing a raga. We don't hear it because we are confining it to the, what you call the gut, the lower levels of frequency. Tambura, actually its etymology is Tan Pura. The Tan of the whole. Wholeness, that means infinity. So ultimately everything is infinite. It's up to us to decide what level of infinity we want to hear the music of. If we increase our ability to hear from the low levels right now to the higher levels, a huge creativity revolution can happen, wherein we replace the present stress on productivity. See, what has happened because of our stress on analytical part of the brain is productivity, assembly line culture, economies of scale, and the rat race. All these are consequences of an overstress on the analytical part of the brain. If we balance it with an equal amount of stress on the holistic part of the brain, the creativity revolution by which we explore the world by going within our own forehead. And this song of Kabir is a very beautiful one, which explains how our evolution takes place by and through such an exploration. The three of them will now present this song to us.
साधो हो साधो अब ये तन ठाट तंबूरे का, ये तन ठाट तंबूरे का,
ये तन ठाट तंबूरे का, ये तन ठाट तंबूरे का।
पांच तत्व का बना है तंबूरा, पांच तत्व का बना है तंबूरा, तार लगा है नौ तूरे का, तार लगा है नौ तूरे का। अब ये तन ठाट
तंबूरे का, ये तन ठाट तंबूरे का।
छत तार मरोड़त खूंटी, छत तार मरोड़त खूंटी, निकसत राग हजूरे का, निकसत राग हजूरे का।
ये तन ठाट तंबूरे का, ये तन ठाट तंबूरे का। टूटा तार बिखर गई खूंटी, आ टूटा तार बिखर गई खूंटी, हो गया धूल मधुरे का,
हो गया धूल मधुरे का। या देही का गर्व न कीजे, या देही का गर्व न कीजे, उड़ गया
हंस तंबूरे का,
उड़ गया
हंस तंबूरे का। ये तन ठाट तंबूरे का, ये तन ठाट तंबूरे का। कहे है कबीर सुनो भाई साधो, कहे है कबीर सुनो भाई साधो, अगम पंथ एक सूरे का,
अगम पंथ हो अगम पंथ, अगम पंथ हे अगम पंथ एक सूरे का, अगम एक सूरे का अब ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का हो साधो रे साधो हाँ साधो अब ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का।
कहत कबीर सुनो भई साधो अगम पंथ एक सूरे का. Kabir may have been illiterate, but he sure knew how to use words with multiple meanings to convey his message. Using these two words, he is explaining how evolution takes place. Agam has got two meanings. One is unbounded or infinite. Other is a gam, overcoming all sorrow, no sorrow at all. Surya has got three meanings. One is someone sure, brave warrior. Another one is sur, one who sees harmony in the working of the universe. There is also a third meaning, one who sees the purpose or plan of God. So he explains how evolution takes place, saying we are all born at one, usually low level of infinity, agam, and therefore the second meaning of Sura, we do not see any harmony in any inner music. Therefore, we are put in different situations in this world. What is called karma, designed exactly, ideally for our evolution. The real evolution takes place when we are challenged to take decisions which involve deciding whether we should stick with the right or the wrong. In other words, do we follow our conscience? Not easy. Only a Sura, in the other sense, brave warrior, can do it. But if we stick to that, then we evolve, and then we are able to go to the next level of agam, wherein we can hear the inner music, at least the initial forms. To take one example, let's take example of Oppenheimer, who could hear that when he was at a young age itself. So obviously, his earlier evolution had taken him to a certain level of agam. But when he is sent into this world, into this classroom, to further refine it, to further grow, to further evolve. Those of you who have seen this movie would recall that the movie's main thing is about the dilemma that he went through when the first atomic explosion, what was called the Trinity experiment, succeeded. The entire scientific community was stomping, oppie, oppie. Time had him on his cover. But something bothered him, saying, have I done the right thing? And then he went, it was not an easy decision. He went and told the president, close down the entire experiment. Not correct to carry on. And he was penalized for that very badly. The movie shows that in great detail. What the movie doesn't show is that before all this happened, many years before that, there was another physicist who was working under Oppenheimer, David Bohm, who was actually equally brilliant. But, the military was keeping a tab on all these people secretly. So David Bohm had, just like Oppenheimer, some communist inclinations. So they asked Oppenheimer to throw him out of the project so that they could prosecute him actually, and persecute him, which they did. And Oppenheimer agreed to it because at that time he was trying to rise up in the hierarchy. So he did what his conscience was telling him don't do. So it is not as though all the time we will follow the conscience. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. When we do it, we go up. When we don't, we go down. So life is actually, evolution is actually a snakes and ladders game. But if we continue to learn, see, to err is human. It's easy to condemn someone saying, oh, why did he throw out David Bohm? Very selfish of him. He wanted to rise. Very easy to condemn like that. But point is, to err is human. We all make mistakes. We come here because of our propensity to go away from the ideal. But then, as we stick to the ideal, as we stick to our conscience, we become a better and better human being. Until, the term that we often use for Ram is Purushottam. That means best possible human being. So that is the goal of evolution, Purushottam. And one who does that can see, he is able to then hear inner music of the third kind. Nikasat Rag Huzureka. And if he does that, then he overcomes all sorrow. That is how evolution takes place. And Kabir conveyed this advice to anyone and everyone that he met anywhere and everywhere. This was his only message. Just keep doing the right thing. Don't have to bother about the theory behind evolution or anything like that. Just keep doing the right thing. Never violate your conscience, and automatically one day you will become God. Because that is what the universe is all about. That is what the creation is all about. He conveyed it in language which those to whom he was talking can understand. It was always as a poem in poetic form. His own fellow weavers, when they were complaining that, look, we are at the bottom of society, so poor, what can we do? He said, you can catapult to God. And he used that analogies that they could understand. Jeeni, bini chadariya. That just like you are making a cloth for yourself, God has made us a cloth. All we have to do is make sure that the cloth is clean. And if we clean our mindset, we automatically become God. To a girl who is looking for a husband, Sakhiya Vaghar Sabse Nyara, Jahan Puran Purush Hamara. Puran, infinite, the whole. Look for that. And of course, when the poor girl gets engaged to an ordinary human being, says that doesn't matter. That's part of how life evolves. You don't look for wholeness in the other person. You look for wholeness in yourself. So instead of, to the husband, you have to remove the veil in front of you. In order to reach that goal, you have to remove the veil of ego. So to each and every person that he met, his message was the same but couched in different language. There is one verse in which he addressed multiple audiences. People like Shanti who are singers, it begins with that advice for them. He doesn't say singing is bad. Singing is very good, but go to the root of the singing. Sunta nahi dhun ki khabar, anhad ka baja bajta, rasmand mandir bajta, bahar sune to kya hua. Bahar is the craft of music. But focus, as Kaushiki had put it, focus on the art and the origin of music. Where is the origin of music? Mandir, man ke andar. That is where the origin of music is. In this verse, he had similarly addressed 2 lines to the lawyer, 2 lines to the priest, 2 lines even to the gambler. He said, doesn't matter, gamble, but Ultimately, you will discover that the only thing worth gambling on is the law of love, nothing else. And then there were 2 lines addressed to the likes of me also. Puthi kitabe vachta auro ko nit samjhavta. You are reading Einstein, Schrödinger, Mandelbrot, explaining it to others. Trikuti mahal dhunde nahi. Trikuti means, see the 3 gunas. You have to go above the guna from sagun to nirgun. If you are not in that process, bak mara to kya hua? Very, very relevant advice, especially for someone of my age. Bak mara to kya hua? So now, enough of this bak, and thank you very much for listening to all this. Thank you, but I must also tell you 2 things. One is that among the things that I learned from Kaushiki was never own the applause. That is poison for you. Okay? Because ultimately, the ego can play havoc with us. And the whole idea of evolution is to get over the ego. The second thing maybe, in fact 2 more things I will share with them before she takes over. Second thing is that the whole theme was Advaita. And there is a saying, to understand Advaita is to live Advaita. So rather than it's good to understand things, but the ultimate thing is to be able to get over the feeling of the other when we deal with each one in our lives every day. And the most important, I would say, is the other includes those who don't agree with us. I'm sure that while so many clapped, there are some few who would have felt all this was real buck. What's the big idea? I think it's necessary to respect the rights of such minorities, and I would encourage them to come and present their viewpoint and ask their questions without feeling intimidated by that applause. And that process now, Priya will.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask anyone who has questions to please come in front. We need to record it, Aparna, if you don't mind.
Einstein's definition, the value of a human being is determined primarily by the measure and the sense. So I just wanted something more about the sense.
Yes. You see, there are different kinds of self that come into the picture. That's how evolution takes place, through very, very subtle ladders. Okay? In my opinion, I can't be sure what Einstein had in mind. I think what he had in mind was that, for example, if you compare Einstein and, let's say, Kabir, not that I am competent to compare them, but obviously, even in their levels of infinity, there is a difference. Okay? Between Einstein had reached a certain level of infinity higher than mine. Kabir had reached a certain level of infinity even higher than Einstein's, I would think. So when he's referring to the sense, he's referring to that ladder, that there is a measure within a certain framework, and then beyond that framework, there is also a sense wherein you go to the even higher level. You follow?
Hi. Thank you so much for doing this. I really love the session. I found very specific presentation style where you are picking up words and going to the deeper meaning of words. And that's where it hit me, because I'm also on the same journey. Now, with respect to words and deeper meaning of words, uh, I, I saw the presentation and also the foundation of the presentation from science, or if I can use an aggregate word, the mind or the mindset you spoke about. And I would like to use a different word, not the mind, but the heart. Can we start using heart set instead of saying mindful? Because I feel that this is more of, if I may use very loosely, don't get me wrong, a Western kind of a mindset, if I may call it. Can we start using heartful instead of mindful? I feel that we'll be better placed in all our words if we use heart sets and heartful, and I just like to understand your perspective on that. Thank you.
I would say there is no harm at all. Good. Ultimately, all words are a pointer. As the Buddha put it, never mistake the finger for the moon. So the finger points to the moon. So all words are pointers. And what we are really talking about is the inner being. The inner being, you can call it mindset, you can call it heart set, you can call it what you want. I think the more commonly used term is mindset, which is why I stuck to that. But it doesn't matter to me what word you use. Does that satisfy you?
Do we have any more questions? No. Okay. You have a question.
This is about Einstein's famous statement, God doesn't play dice. Now, when I understand that when the double slit experiment, the particle wave theory was proposed, Einstein was not particularly convinced about it. I don't know whether it's true. And that's the context in which during the Bohr-Einstein conversation, he said God doesn't play dice. God doesn't play dice. Now, in what context did he say that, and what exactly that means? Could you just explain a bit?
You see, I think what he was, the term God we use in different ways. The way I look at it is this. When Einstein said God does not play dice, he was referring to the ultimate law that governs the universe, which is the law of love. As Michel Naime said, love is the law of God. So at that level, there is no probability. Another way of looking at it is that creative force, you can call it creator or creative law, is never partial. He would never say, okay, you get this and for example, let's say, for example, all of us are born with different capabilities, right? Some of us are born with better physical strength, some with very little physical strength. It looks like a game of dice, wherein some people get something, it looks like chance and accidents. But what Einstein was saying was, there is no such thing as chance and accidents. There is a reason, there is a law, there is a cause behind everything. And in quantum mechanics, the whole context was what is called the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. They introduced probability theory. And probability theory not in terms of our mind's inability to understand it, but in terms of intrinsic, that you can never get over that probability. And that's what Einstein was objecting to. He said, it looks probabilistic now because we have not understood the deeper law. So, to go to what Planck said, that matter is a result of field. But field itself is the result of something even subtler. So if you go to the subtlest or the most infinite. At that level, there is no such thing as probability. That's what he was trying to get at, I think.
Thank you very much, Anantuji. It was so enlightening. Anantuji, millions of people, including myself, were brought up as children to think of God as someone utterly other than us. Someone high above in the sky or somewhere, we don't know where exactly, but we were taught to believe in this utterly transcendent God who had actually nothing to do with us. He was absolutely different from us, I mean, totally different. And that's how hundreds of millions of people actually, think of God. So in the context of what you have said about, perhaps what you were saying is the purpose of life is to become God, or to understand the divinity within us, or understand that everything is God. So in the context of what you have said, what would you have to say, or what would you like to say to people who have been brought up to think of God as utterly different and absolutely transcendent? Because that's a very different understanding of God, which creates this big gap which cannot be bridged ever. So what would you like to say in that context?
I think most of our problems, especially of religious polarization, happen because of that attitude. And the reality is different. The reality is that our own consciousness is God in its pure form. Our own consciousness, in other words, if the mindset, again I'm using the word mindset, you can call it heart set, if it can become pure, then we are God. And the only way to become pure is if you can still the mind, so therefore be still and know that you are God.
Do we have any more questions? Would you like to come here?
I just wanted to hear your thoughts on one thought that came to my mind during the talk. I was wondering where, in my observation, the society is sort of already evolving to the mindset that you talked about presently. I would like to take the example of, say, when I was a child, the concept of being non-gendered or being not in the rigid sets that existed at that time was not accepted. We were not aware of that. In the present context, we understand fluidity in, say, gender and other aspects of identity. So my thought was probably on that frame, that as a society, are we already on a journey to progress into this mindset? And that was my thought. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. First and foremost, I would say God cares about each one rather than the collective. Okay? So we interact with each other for our individual growth. So God looks at the evolution of each person. So he is more concerned with that rather than how evolution happens in society. But because society itself is is an accumulation or a conglomeration of various people, depending upon how much each individual has evolved, the society also evolves accordingly. So yes, I think you are right that society is changing and is changing in big ways. Many newspapers do not capture some of these things, but it's happening in a big way. I mean, just to give you one simple example, the popularity of classical music. When I was young, it was assumed that Hindustani Indian classical music is a dying art. But it's now reviving in a big way, especially Drupad, which was regarded as already dead. So these things happen, and but then this has got, the way the society evolves is a consequence of how individuals evolve.
Anantuji, the one problem that I find is that the concept of God has been maybe hijacked or captured more by religion, and rather than by the mystical or spiritual traditions, which means that especially for younger generation, I mean the younger people, there's a outright rejection of God, and it's very difficult to explain it in maybe, or we don't have the terms for it. would you have some term which, what the principle remains the same, the truth remains the same, but it's almost like, how would you, like he said, the words that we are using, what is the words that we can use so that it doesn't get, kind of hijacked by religion and become problematic because of that?
Good question. One candidate for it, I would say, is energy. All energy that we have, physical or mental, is a gift from that oneness. Evolution happens by giving that gift to a limited extent and then helping us to evolve further when that gift will be given in greater quantities. So energy is a manifestation of God. Okay? And in physics, if you look at it, there are equations that describe energy. But as Feynman has stressed, we don't know what energy is. We know that if you add these equations, it remains a constant. But what exactly it is, we still don't know. Because there is no mechanism that can be called energy. But the basic point is, reality is not a mechanism. Reality is love. And all energy flows from that higher love to the lower love. So one way of handling that problem, when Gandhiji had an atheist in his ashram, and some people objected, saying, ashram, atheist, how can you have it? And he answered very beautifully. He said, sometimes an atheist is closer to God than the believers. So, everyone would accept energy as real. See, atheists will say God does not exist. But everyone will say energy exists. So that's one way of handling it. But I accept that that's a major problem because we can't see it. So, when we give words to something that we cannot see, whether it is a mindset or God, there can be some people who say, no, why mindset, why not heart set? So similarly, some people say, why God, why not energy? So we can adopt that word. The advantage I see of the word energy is that we all experience it every day. And we know that we do not create that energy. It comes to us. So it could be one possible candidate for what you are asking. Okay?
Hello, sir. I think she beautifully brought out this Dvaita in education, if you see, right? Let's think about, you learn in school to make more money, right? And that's a given.
Sorry, your voice is not very clear. Maybe you should
Should stay away from it? Okay. Yeah. Is that clear now?
Yeah.
So I was just talking about the Dvaita in education, right? People really don't, teach mystical, you don't really learn about love and others in the school directly. The curriculum is more about what you learn to make more money, right? And on the other side, you see anything about mystical, it's kind of tainted by religion today, right? It becomes a little more religious rather than going to the basic mystics of it, right? So is there some other mechanism by which we can teach children, right? And there are efforts being made by people who come from the scientific background, people like Fritz of Capra. He is running a course called Systems View of Life, right? Is there something that we can do for children which actually can kind of bridge this gap and say, is there some way we can make it part of the curriculum, right? And that's kind of what she was leading towards. The words will actually have some purpose, but then if you really want to ground it and have it made like a kind of something that we bring up children with. Your thoughts on that?
I would say that if we educate ourselves about it, automatically we will be able to come up with a way of educating children. But until we do it, we can't educate children.
We have one more question.
On the question, the way I framed the question when discussing God is, if you ask the question, is there more probable, I mean, is it more probable that there is God or there isn't God? If you examine the probabilities, it is just million times more that there is some order that's, that runs this universe. That order is controlled by some power which nobody can deny, and that to me is possibly God. And the second thing I tell children is, I mean, with our long egos, all that, we think we are very powerful, all that. But if there is no order, you look at how the earth is rotating. I mean, if there is no gravity, we all just will be flying into the universe. Just imagine that picture. That's what confirms there is something, maybe I want to call God or not. I mean,
the second part is not clear to me. Say that again.
Just think of the earth, how it's rotating.
Yes.
If there is no gravity, where will we be? We'll be flying tangential. That's all we are.
You have one more question?
In the context of this discussion about the name, God or energy, do you think it'd be more helpful perhaps to use the term totality for all that exists to denote what people think of as God? Do you think that's a better or a more sensible
Yeah, we
way?
can use any term, but ultimately it's a finger pointing to the moon. And we have to, any term can be also misused. Like, Gandhi coined the term Harijan. But now Harijan is regarded as untouchable. There is no difference between the two. So coining a term does not solve the problem. Understand, that's why I use the term oneness or Advaita, that it refers to that oneness, that, and that has to be practiced. Even the term oneness can be misused. Even the term Advaita can be misused.
Okay, Anantji, I think we'll come to an end now. Thank you so much for a beautiful presentation. I think today has been a beautiful seeding experience. I think we'll have to sit in silence to process all the things that we've learned today. And thank you, Nishant. Thank you, Shanti. Thank you, Dilip. The music. Thank you so much for that. And thanks to Rupa for giving us this beautiful space, Rupa Pai. And thank you all for coming today. And yes, now please join for lunch.